about the waits. Well, this should have started a while ago. There's a few of you left, so we're just going to do a little talk today on the revival of Tiki and Tiki culture, and how could we talk about the revival without talking about Tiki from the beginning, from the history, from the beginning. So just a quick introduction. If you don't know me, my name's Scotty Shuder. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I've been living in Paris, France for 18 years now. I've opened up a tropical cocktail bar called Dirty Dick. It's in the red light district in Paris, the 18th. So that's a little bit about myself. So let's start off with the first slide. Oh, it's going too fast. So, ladies and gentlemen, there we go, okay. So this is Ernest Ray Beaumont Gantz, a.k.a. Don the Beachcomber. He's the godfather, you could say, of Tiki. He's the one who invented everything. If you've ever heard of his name, you've probably never heard his first name because he changed it because it's kind of a funny name. Just a quick touch about Don. When he was a young child, his grandfather was a rum runner, so he used to run rum from Jamaica to the United States with Don at a very early age when he was young. So this taught Don a lot from when he was a young child about nosing rums, tasting different cultures, food, learning about other cultures. And at this time, Americans really didn't travel like that. So this really set him up for the rest of his life and for his career, his legacy. When he became 17, turning 18, his father gave him an ultimatum. He told him, I can either pay for you to go to an Ivy League college, like Yale or something like this, or else I'll pay for you to go around the world for 1 year, travel the world. But when you finish your travels, I'm going to cut you off. His father was very wealthy. He was a Texas oil tycoon. He said, after this year, I'm going to cut you off, and then you'll have to find your own way in the world. So Don, being a young man, chose not to go to college and chose to take up his father's offer to travel the world. And this would become a pillar of what made Tiki culture really by allowing this. So Don, this time he traveled to Cuba. He went to the Floridita. He was drinking daiquiris. Went to having mojitos. He was going to Jamaica. He went to Hawaii. He went to Fiji. He went to Singapore to Raffles. He was drinking slings, trying different foods, and trying different cocktails and rum and things like this, which, as I said before, Americans weren't doing at the time. Normally you would just grow up, get married, go to war, or settle down. So this would also add to the big pillar in the end. So at the end of his travels, he settled down and he said, thanks guys. Big crowd tonight. So he settled down in Hollywood. He got a job in a Chinese restaurant. He was cooking. He was in a Chinese restaurant cooking, so he was learning different ways to cook food, which also he ended up using as the pillar for his success in the end. After this, he got a job on a movie. In the movies, he was in Hollywood, so he was building movie sets. He was working on documentaries, working very closely with the Hollywood actors, directors, and things like this, which would also in turn help him out in his career. But after all these travels, he wanted more in life. He was a rum lover. He wanted to open up his own bar. So on his lunch break one day, he's strolling through Hollywood, and he found the location of Don the Beachcomber, the first restaurant. This was opened in 1934. 14 stools. He put together, making Navy grogs and daiquiris and things like this. He put together his rum blending skills to build a cocktail menu. The decor he kind of took from all around the world: the rotan, the bamboo, the fish nets, the crab traps, and things like this. He put in. So there's another the front. The food that he served, he was saying was Tahitian food, but it wasn't. Actually, it was Chinese food. As I was saying before, thank you. So he was telling people at the time they didn't really know what Chinese food was. They were serving it as Polynesian food. No one knew the better. Through his Hollywood contacts, he became very famous. People were coming. Charlie Chaplin, for instance, was eating there. People were like, he did cool gimmicks like using chopsticks, personalized chopsticks, that he had lockers for each one of his special guests that had their name. And at the time, people didn't even know how to use chopsticks. So it was these little keys that set him apart from everyone else. In Don's own words, with Prohibition officially repealed and recognizing that people hadn't tasted a decent drink during the previous 14 years of darkness, Prohibition, with the smell of rum always on my nostrils, I started to concoct some unusual and at the time exotic drinks. Very well put. So as you can see here, he was kind of a rock star. He was always in the front of the house. He had all the sexy ladies. He would always take care of his VIPs. He would really be the man in front making the coffee grogs, the flaming coffee grogs, like this. Always the star of the show. And then behind the scenes, he would have about 10 or 15 Filipino bartenders really making all the drinks for the whole restaurant. But no one really saw that part of that. So we can speak a little bit about the zombie cocktail, where it comes from. Why not? So I'm sure you've heard of the zombie. It's one of the most famous cocktails that he's invented. It's one of my favorites, my first as well. It comes with a limit of 2 per person. The reason why, back when he was first trying out this drink, it's a plethora of mixed rums from different islands and different exotic ingredients. One of his very, very rich, regular businessmen was in there one day. He had to leave on a business trip. So he started to drink one of these concoctions. He had one. He loved it. He made him another one. He drank the second one. Then he ordered a third one. Don made him the third one. That was that. The guy left. Didn't hear from him again. So a week later, this gentleman returned and says, hey, Don, what the fuck did you put in that drink? And he says, why do you say that? He said, well, after I drank the third drink, I remember getting in a fight with the taxi driver, with the stewardess, and then I woke up half naked in San Francisco on the beach. And I felt like the living dead. What happened? So Don says, well, that's a great name for the drink. We're just going to call it a zombie. And we'll make it a limit of 2, which is also a great business technique, because if you're trying to tell a man he can only have 2 drinks, of course he's going to have 3 or even 4. And at the time, if you look at the price of the zombie, it's today's standards, it's about $30. So it wasn't a cheap drink. So it was good business practice as well. So he was making history at the time. He was the first one to really start the chain idea in the United States, like the Hard Rock Cafe or something like that. He was the first one to do the same recipes for food and the same recipes for drink, and then open them in different cities all around the world, which it's still used to this day. He was so popular, in fact, that people used to poach his staff, and everyone was trying to copy what he was doing because it was so popular at the time. I mean, this was really a very, very popular thing going on in the United States at the time. So what he did was he took his cocktails and he put them in codes. Basically, the bartenders would make their drinks, 2 of this, one of these, but they wouldn't actually know what was in the bottles because he coded everything for them so they would know what the recipe was, but they didn't actually know what was in the bottles. So this way, he was making it secure so no one could steal, his hard work and his legacy, basically. So, but people still tried. They still made his drinks, but they weren't really what he was supposed to be doing. Just after this, he was in the armed forces. He was stationed as a colonel in Italy, and he looked after all the generals. He would take care of soldiers, give them a warm food, a nice place to sleep, and he was even look after Churchill at the time. So he was very popular even when he was in the military. Here's a little video. Oh no, maybe not. Maybe not. Is there sound here? We have sound? Well, I just tried to throw this video in. There's no audio, I guess. This is the Beachcombers from London. It's kind of a funny video to see. This is the early 60s. I mean, you had a bar with freaking alligators in it and parrots, and it's pretty insane to see. And this was just in Mayfair. It was in the Mayfair Hotel. So just to see, this even spread across the globe into Europe and whatnot. So this is the Beachcomber bar. Since there's no audio, I'm going to switch to the next one. So after he got back, his legacy was actually, he wasn't very good at paperwork. So he basically was divorcing his wife, and she took him for everything. She even owned his name. She owned all of his restaurants, and he pretty much was left at zero. Phoebe, after he got divorced, he decided to move to Hawaii. And in Hawaii, he would own his own name, and then he would move on to Hawaii and become very profitable and open up some great businesses there as well. Besides that, across the United States, these tiki reviews, as you saw before in the video, it wasn't just a bar where you go have a cocktail. You would spend the whole evening in these places. It would be a show. You'd have really exotic food, suckling duck, pig, and all these things. You'd have, it was erotic as well. You'd have hula dancers for the men. You'd have men in loincloths, blowing fire and things like this. So it was exotic, it was erotic, it was a hit. And there were from LA to New York, they were opening all over the place and really just doing exactly what Don did and really trying to. At the time as well, we could call it a tropical fever. It hit the United States. It was just the end of World War II. So a lot of soldiers were stationed in the Pacific, and they came back, and they wanted to have a bit of this sense of what they saw when they were abroad. Also, Hawaii became a state at the time, so the United States had really hit a tropical fever. People were having luau's in their backyard, and it was really the thing to be doing at the time. I mean, even my grandparents were really into this at the time. We have to speak about this guy as well, real quick. He's also changed his name at the time to Trader Vic. I'm sure maybe you guys have heard of it. Trader Vic was, I would say, his closest rival at the time. He was born in just outside of Oakland, California, in Emeryville. He grew up quite poor. His parents owned a grocery store. He worked very closely with them. And then when he became of age, they helped him open up this bar called Hinky Dinks. So it was a bar. They served barbecue and food, and he got it started for himself. But then he as well wanted some change, and I think he saw what was going on with the tropical fever as well, and he kind of followed the same roads around the late 40s. So he traveled, as Don did, around the world to find what he was looking for, to be inspired to what he wanted to become. So he went to Cuba. I think, if you've ever been to Cuba, it's life-changing. It was for me. And I think when he came back, he really had the itch. He had the tropical itch, so he came back to this bar, and he gave it a tropical makeover. He changed his name to Trader Vic, and then he opened up a tropical cocktail bar, Trader Vic's. He kind of followed the same trends with the food. The food was mostly Chinese-ish type food, which he called Polynesian food. But he as well was an inventor of his own drinks. He wasn't really stealing Don's drinks. He was making his own. And he was one of the first ones to actually publish a tropical cocktail book for other people to see. And he would actually show you how you can do these type of things at home the right way. By the time he finished, I think in 1960, he had 25 different Trader Vic's in the whole world, and there's still a few of them open today. He joined up with the Beverly Hilton, not Beverly Hilton, there's one in Beverly Hilton, the Hilton chain, and he opened in most of the Hiltons around the world. So he followed the same technique as Don by opening up a chain, which is still working to this day, and he's passed away. So it was a big feat for these times for someone to do. So if we move on, we'll talk about the revival of tiki, what's happening now, why it's becoming popular again. After the golden era of tiki, around the end of the 1960s, you had the Vietnam War that broke out. So this was a big change for the United States, for the people who were living there who weren't in the war. They were very anti-war, they were very anti the establishment and anti their parents. So this all, in fact, we could say the hippies pretty much killed tiki off at this time, yeah? They were into free love, and they didn't want to be like their parents. They didn't want to go to these tropical cocktail bars, and so tiki kind of died off for a while. Through the 1970s, it was kind of the dark era of tiki. There were still places like Tiki Tea in Hollywood or the Mai Kai in Florida that were still open and keeping it real and really doing what they were doing since. But everything else had really closed down, and it wasn't really relevant anymore, and people had just forgotten. And all of these great cocktails and recipes were forgotten at this point, except that these few places that were still open. So around the 1980s, around the 1980s, sorry guys, let me get on the right slide. The 1980s and 1990s was really the beginning of the revival of tiki. You had somebody called Sven Kirsten who wrote the Book of Tiki. I don't know if you've heard of it, but I recommend, if you haven't read it, buy it and read it. It's the Bible or the blueprint, basically, of the beginning until now of the whole pop culture, the movement of tiki. Also, you have a man called Beach Bum Berry and Tiki Files at the time as well, who were restarting the movement up, bringing back the exotica music, finding some of these old recipes, throwing backyard luau's and things like this. Beach Bum Berry wrote Intoxica at Sippin' Safari, and what he was doing is decoding. He was given a little notebook from one of Don the Beachcomber's head bartenders that she'd give him, like, Xeroxed a little book that was all in codes. So this was the beginning, but it took him another 5 years to figure out what the codes were. Don mix number 1, dash of this, dash of that. We didn't really know exactly what the recipes were. So this still took him a long time. Like, even the zombie, for example, he didn't find out the missing ingredient until his third book, which was cinnamon. Which is pretty interesting, actually. Also in England, about 10 years ago, you had the Mahiki, you have Trailer Happiness that opened, and I think this was big influence for the world as well, for the revival of tiki, and also for the European, mostly England at the time, but now in turn, it's really pushed forward the tiki movement throughout Europe, as well as the United States. I mean, the first time I went in Trailer as well, it really, it blew me away too. The drinks and everything was just done so great. Then we opened up We opened up Dirty Dick in 2013. It was a dream of mine to open up Dirty Dick. We really strive to keep old school classic drinks the way that they're supposed to be made. It takes us 8 to 10 hours per day to prep for one night service. We're making about 14 different syrups and juices, homemade, fresh every day. And then also, not just the classics, we're doing new school cocktails, new full Polynesians, like for instance, the Maroro Daiquiri, which is Don Q Cristal rum, fat washed with organic coconut, muddled with some fresh pineapple, lime, and sugar. So it's basically like a hybrid of a pina colada, very light, nice to drink. You still have the exotic, and then it's served in a coconut in a chilled coupette. So keep it new and still keep it with the old, and keep it fresh and clean for the new school full tropical drinks. So I think the revival really of tiki as well is the revival of escapism, because for me that's what tiki's all about. When you go into Trailer Happiness, Mahiki, Dirty Dick, Tiki Tea, Mai Kai, you really forget your problems, you forget where you're at, and it really, for me, I just decompress, de-stress, and I think that's what people were looking for, and I think that's what the revival of tiki is all about, the revival of escapism. So that's pretty much my talk, guys. Do you have any questions, anybody? Anybody? Where's the rum? That's a good question. I just found my computer, so at least we got this one done, huh? Thanks for coming. Thanks for hearing, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.